Yes. Hello everybody. Who loves exits? More hands up. Come on, exits. It's the lifeline, it's the sweet and soul of the start of life. And today we have Daniel from Creandum and he's going to tell us the latest about exits in the Nordics. So let's hear what's cooking in the exits in the Nordics.
Cool.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks a lot, John. Here we go. Right. I'm Daniel, I'm with Creandum, and the last 7-8 years we've been tracking the amount of exit value that has been created from the Nordic region. And today we're releasing our report from 2016 in cooperation with Arctic15. So there will be a blog post out covering all the stuff that I will mention here. All right, so over the last 15 years, I think we've been creating about $60 billion of exit value from the Nordics, and I will run you through this in about 10 minutes. So it's a good $5-6 billion per minute in exit value. Creandum is an early stage venture capital firm based in Stockholm and San Francisco. We'll actually come back to why we're in San Francisco, but it has to do with something related to that a lot of entrepreneurs are creating their companies and building their companies towards the US, which is the main exit market. We just raised a $200 million USD fund, so very much looking for new investment opportunities. And here you can see of some of the portfolio companies that we are happily backers of. Right, so the Nordic ecosystem has created some amazing companies, products and services. You're probably familiar with most of these, especially on the consumer side, but also very successful more business-to-business companies, both in the software, hardware, and consumer space. So it's kind of amazing, this little region of 20 million or so people have created all these almost household names. If you look at the trend over the last 15-16 years, it's a clear upgoing trend. So even if we include the cycles of 2000, we're at 3x that value of the last 5 years. So basically $4 to $5 billion every year is created in terms of exit value from Nordic-related tech companies, which is quite amazing. And it becomes maybe even more impressive if we put it into some context. So here I try to compare the Nordics with some of the sort of global regions, China, US, rest of the world, and especially when we take into consideration the small population and the GDP, the Nordic really stands out as a very sort of efficient region in terms of creating value. So in terms of billion-dollar exits, which has been labeled as unicorns, the Nordic has accounted for 7% of the global billion-dollar exits the last 10 years, on par with the rest of Europe, and just behind China, and of course US is the big factory when it comes to creating these companies. If we then look at the Nordics compared to Europe, we have a situation where, and especially maybe if we compare the amount of investments to the region and the exit value created, where the Nordics basically, again, over the last 10 years, have contributed to 50% of the Europe global, or sort of the Europe billion-dollar exits. So the Nordic has accounted for as many billion-dollar companies as the rest of Europe, which is again, very, very impressive. And even if we look at some other factors, try to look at other indexes, it becomes clear that the Nordic at least contributes 20, 25, and maybe even more percent of the tech value being created in Europe. So a new thing for this report is that we started to also analyze a little bit the business models of these billion-dollar companies. And here you have a subset of different consumer business models, different enterprise, primarily software business models, and then hardware as its own category. And we try to map out the contribution of each for various regions. So the lighter green is here the Nordics, and we can see that there's a sort of a big portion in the consumer digital. And a lot of that is down to games, where Finland specifically has played a very important role together with Sweden, and a number of very, very successful companies created from that region. The other sectors where Nordic are sort of well performing is in software. Used to be the enterprise software model, nowadays more and more the SaaS model, even if we're still way behind the US when it comes to software primarily. If we then move in to look at what it looks like inside the region, so this is an effort to try and look at the total exit value and how it's distributed between the different countries. Split up in terms of trade sales or M&A versus IPO. And of course it gets very skewed because if in certain cases you might have a very big exit that contributes to a lot of value, which is for example the case with Norway, which had a $5.5 billion exit 10 years ago. But Sweden is accounting for about 50%, a bit more when it comes to the number of exits, and slightly less than 50% when it comes to the amount of value. And then it's pretty even Steven between Norway, Denmark, and Finland. And then if we dig a little bit deeper into the really big winners, so $100 million and above, the story is pretty much the same. So Sweden has contributed about 55% of the number of $100 million and larger exits in all brackets. So starting with the billion-dollar companies, the $500 million to $1 billion, and the ones more than 100 million. Sweden has the most exits in all brackets or intervals. Not surprisingly, it's still the bigger population. So where does all these exits come from? So we wanted to see both from the point of view of M&A and IPO, and M&As have actually contributed almost 80 to 90% of all exit value. So really most companies from the Nordics get sold, and some IPO. And the bigger the companies in terms of value, the more important is the US as the exit market. So one thing which is lacking in the Nordic is some big acquirers. We don't have what we call the aircraft carriers, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Microsoft of the world, the Intels, the Ciscos. So a lot of the sort of Nordic companies, both because they're growing into those markets, but also that eventually get acquired from the US. And you can see the dominance of the US to the left, to the far right in terms of the really big exits. It constitutes 55–60% of the exit value. Another perspective that we're covering in the report is where the investors are coming from. And it's pretty clear that across the whole set of data, Nordic VCs are very active. So 90% of deals have had a Nordic investor, and that's true for the small one as well as the big ones. But the bigger the exit, the more international investors are coming in and investing, of course. Typically the big growth rounds are raising money from the US and Silicon Valley in particular. So just to conclude quickly, and as I said, there's more information to be read on the Arctic15 blog. So Nordic has really done spectacularly well, especially considering its small size when it comes to building really great and valuable companies over the last 10 years. Contributing 7% of the global billion-dollar exits, 50% of Europe, Sweden itself contributing 50% of the Nordics, and the path to the US and the exit market there is, as we saw, absolutely vital. So that was 60 billion worth of exit value in about 10 minutes, and I think we're pretty much done, unless we have a question from the audience. Okay. This one?
Hello? Yes, okay. All right, let's give a big hand for Daniel. Great, thank you very much.